can meet on the same page. Error, wrong, selfishness, pain, problems. This is a reality of the universe we live in. This is a reality of the planet that we are on, this planet called Earth. There is much selfishness. There is much pain. There is much problem. And all of it stems from our nature. God allows free will to a certain point, and as a result, we've hurt people. As a result, we've said things we shouldn't have said. As a result, we've said things to family members and loved ones and people closest to us, and maybe it has been in these few days of quarantine, you have already said things that were hurtful and painful and difficult. I know that I have. We've already been there. There's 10 of us in our home quarantine here in LA, and we have already said things that are hurtful and painful. In a way, that's what I'm saying. We've all sinned. And here's what happens when we sin. We sin, we do wrong, and this thing called a conscience kicks in, and it tells me I'm bad, I'm dumb, I'm wrong, I'm ashamed, I'm embarrassed, I shouldn't have done that. And the Bible teaches that Jesus is enough for that. The Bible says he who knew no sin became sin so that you and I could become the righteousness of God in Christ Jesus. And it says there is now therefore no shame, embarrassment, and condemnation for those who believe in the finished work of Jesus, which is to say all of your error, all of your wrong, all of your sin, all of your selfishness is completely forgiven and covered in Jesus. Everyone talks about Christianity. Everyone knows the name Jesus Christ, but how rarely we talk about what he has actually done for humanity. Every bit of error, every bit of wrong, every bit of selfishness, every selfish, sadistic, evil, manipulative, gossiping, selfish act that's ever been committed has been paid for in the person of Jesus, and provision has been made available for your total forgiveness. That's all it takes, is just receiving and believing that what Jesus did is real, and the fact that he rose again on the third day proves that all of his words are true. Everything he did was true, and he's the only one that can beat death, come back, and say, essentially, I told you so. Jesus is enough for your sin. You ever had somebody do something so nice to you, and your response was, hey, man, I owe you. I'm going to get you back, right? Let me Venmo you, whatever. Let me pay you back for what you've done. I think oftentimes we take that perspective with God. We take that perspective with Jesus. We think to ourselves, he's done so many good things for me, I'm going to get him back. Or I'm going to make it up to him, right? Like, Jesus, I know you forgave me, so because you forgave me, I'm going to pray. Because you forgave me, I'm going to do this. And oftentimes that motivation is fine, but it slips into that mindset that tells me I've got to help God with my sin. I'm going to help Jesus take care of my sin. I got such good news today, live in the middle of this global quarantine. You don't have to help God with your sin. You don't. You only have to give up and surrender and yield and say, I can't fix myself. I can't solve my sin problem. I can't overcome my selfishness, but I trust Jesus to forgive me completely, and nothing can separate you from his forgiveness and his love for you. Jesus is enough for salvation. Number two, we're going to keep moving. Number two, Jesus is enough for your satisfaction. That's a cool word, right? Satisfaction. When I say satisfaction, what comes to mind? What are the associations you make when I say satisfaction? Do you think to yourself, satisfaction, that car, satisfaction, that career, satisfaction, that girl, that guy, satisfaction, that relationship, satisfaction, that renown, satisfaction, that status, satisfaction, those clothes, satisfaction, right? And we think of all of these cultural connotations that surround satisfaction. Simply put, we think satisfaction, success, satisfaction. That's what we're preached to, right? And that's what we're told in our culture, in our context, on our continent here in the Western world. We're told that success is the key. The key is success will lead to satisfaction. And yet, throughout Scripture, we see that those things are so fleeting. Those things are, by definition, fickle. That what really brings true satisfaction. It's an interesting time, right? Because we're here watching right now live. We're in the middle of, essentially, I know it's not completely accurate, but a global quarantine. And it's probably caused us all a bit of pause to say, what makes me satisfied? What brings me contentment as a human being? Now is definitely not the time for communicators, preachers, and teachers to start expounding on the 7 keys to sex.
Hello.
I could do that. 7 keys to sex. That's actually very appropriate during the quarantine, if you get my drift. But that'll be another broadcast we'll do. I tell you what. But seriously, now's really not the time for teachers and communicators and even political figures to be like, here's 7 keys to a successful career. Because we now know, hey, that's not what brings satisfaction. To be honest, my heart immediately goes to millions of people, maybe I could take it to billions, who are wondering if their job will still be there. Will I even have a career? And yet, so much of what we build our satisfaction on is something that could be over in the matter of a few days in the midst of a pandemic. That is challenging to hear myself say that, to be honest. What will come of my career? What will come of our income? What will become of our economy? So we now know that's not what brings satisfaction. What brings satisfaction? Well, let me read this verse again to you. He says, Paul to Timothy, old man to young man, about ready to die, Timothy in his mid-30s, trying to pastor a church in Ephesus in the tens of thousands. He says, this message has now been manifest through Jesus, Jesus, who is abolished death and brought life and immortality to light through the gospel. He has abolished death. Let me explain what I mean. Jesus, when I say Jesus is enough for satisfaction, I also believe what I'm saying is Jesus is enough for death. In the world that I live in, the Western world, we're basically taught in so many words to avoid death at all costs, to avoid it at all costs, right? I mean, we try to stay young. We try to look young. We try to live forever on this earth, on this planet. Avoid, right? I mean, how often do you think about death? I mean, if you said a lot, that would be rare. Most of us try not to think about it. This pandemic has got it on our mind. Life and death is facing us. And so it was for Paul. Paul's facing the next life. He knows he's going to die. And what is the words he writes? He says, I got confidence. Jesus has abolished death. Now you're thinking, abolished death? What do you mean? We're still dying. Yeah, but he has taken away the sting. He's taken away literally all the effects of death, all the fear, the torment, the horror that comes around death. That has been removed. And now Jesus has introduced us to this thing called immortality. And that is to bring the contentment and the satisfaction to human beings everywhere. That this is not home. We're going home, church home. We're going home, and this isn't it. So this short stay here on earth is about what? Is it about career and stuff and the collection of toys? No, it's about people. It's about relationship. It's about our Creator. It's about seeing his handiwork and his beauty and his majesty everywhere we look. It's about savoring every minute and moment we do with people that we love, with people that we're in community with. Jesus is enough for satisfaction. Why? Because he's enough for death. I love 1 Corinthians 15. Oh, death, where is your sting? Maybe you've been to a funeral with a pastor like myself, and the pastor gets up there and he reads from 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 55. Oh, death, where is your sting? Maybe you're sitting there crying over a loved one you've lost, and you're thinking, it still stings. But of course, the sting that Paul was writing about in 1 Corinthians 15 is this hopeless, helpless, all is done and over. No. Death for us is no longer defeat. Death for us now is graduation. Death is when we go home. Death is when we spend eternity on a new heavens and a new earth where there will be no disease, there will be no pain, there will be no crying, there will be no problems, it will be perfection. And that is where we're headed. In the meantime, we make the most of the moments and minutes we have on earth. And that, and ultimately that alone, brings us true contentment and satisfaction. In conclusion, number 3, not only is Jesus enough for salvation, Jesus is enough for our satisfaction. But lastly, in conclusion, number 3, in a moment, Philip and Jordan S. are going to join me, and we're going to play. Yeah, Philip, come on, man. You can start playing the piano. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend and yours, Philip Farrell. Justin, you know Philip. We love Philip. He's such a good man.
Love Phil.
We're gonna sing.
Let's go,
You're
Phil.
a good man. We're gonna sing together in just a moment. But before we do, in conclusion, number 3, Jesus is enough for security. Boy, we need some security right now. Maybe you're like me. Maybe you deadbolted your door of your apartment or your condo or your townhome or your house, or you and your roommates have gotten a deadbolt or an extra lock because things are so unsure. Things by definition are insecure, aren't they? It's like, I don't know, will there be looting? You know, will people take to the streets? Will this get worse? What will happen? And so we're searching for security, aren't we? I know I feel that need. Suddenly I'm like, I need to know that we're secure, that my kids are secure. Well, Paul is about to communicate to Timothy here the security that he has in Jesus. Jesus brings security. Listen to the words of a secure man, even though he's about to die. Listen to these words. It says in verse 11, I know I was appointed a preacher. I was appointed a leader of leaders. And that's one of the reasons he says that I'm kind of going through some problems here. It's one of the reasons I'm in Rome in prison. They're going to cut my head off because I'm a preacher. But he says, I'm not embarrassed. I'm not ashamed. I'm convinced. Listen to this security. I'm convinced that he's able to guard until the day that has been entrusted to me, until the day that I slip into eternity, Paul says. I'm convinced. I'm convinced. One translation says Paul's words would be translated this way. I couldn't be more sure. Just couldn't be more sure. That's all. Just couldn't be more sure. And I read that a couple of days ago in preparation for this moment, and I thought, that wouldn't be a bad way to wake up in the middle of a pandemic. I couldn't be more sure. I mean, if you were in prison, if you knew they were going to cut your head off in a few days, I don't know if that's what I would write. I don't know if I would text a buddy and be like, text Justin and be like, couldn't be more sure. I mean, you could argue, Paul, you couldn't be more unsure. Your days are numbered, your moments, your minutes, that you're not going to live much longer. How can you be so sure? And I want to show you why Paul was so sure. And I want to remind you that when it comes to Christianity, what makes us sure is not our church attendance, it's not our tithing, it's not highlighting our Bible, it's not the way we vote. What gives us security and confidence and assurance is a person. Not a theology, not 10 commandments or 600 commandments. Jesus fulfilled the 10 commandments, ladies and gentlemen. They have been fulfilled. We cannot fulfill them, and that's the problem. What gives us security? It's not our doctrine. It's not our dogma. It's not our good deeds, as if we're good all the time, because we're not. What gives us security? Listen to the words of Paul. Minutes or moments before he dies, he says, for I know whom I believe. Here's what will give you security in this life. Number one, like Paul, if you'll know whom you believe. I want to make a declaration. Church home is not built on what we believe. Church home is built on whom we believe, and that couldn't be more different. This church is not built on a what. This church is not built on a teaching or a doctrine or a speech it's built on a man. It's built on a person, and his name is Jesus. And for Paul, there's no security unless there's a person. Paul believed in that prison that Jesus was there. Paul believed that the moment they went to lay his head on the guillotine and cut his head off, that Jesus was there. Paul was willing to die not for a doctrine or a dogma or a church steeple or stained glass windows or a church website and a logo. Paul was willing to die for whom he believed. Don't take my word for it. Jesus is alive. Jesus is real. He died, he was buried, but he rose again on the third day, and he levitated into heaven. And the hundreds of people who saw the eyewitness account, they told us later throughout the corridors of history, he said he would come back. He said there was going to be a day he would return again. He would take us all home. In the meantime, we make the most of the minutes we have. I know whom I believe. I'm so disinterested in just the mere dissemination of concepts and principles and ideas and keys. We have an overwhelming dopamine inundation of principles, concepts, ideas, and steps and things you should do. My brothers and sisters, we need a person. We need a whom to believe in. A whom to believe in. And whatever your political persuasion, my hope is not in the political system. My hope is in the God of the universe, who has always been and always will be. He changes not. He doesn't change because of diseases. He doesn't change because of a pandemic. He doesn't need to change. He is love personified. He is truth personified. He's forgiveness personified. And he's always been that and will always be that. And our time's coming soon. We're going to go home. But like I said, in the meantime, we're going to remember whom we believe in the number 2. And I'm done. I'm done. I promise. We're going to sing in a moment. I'm done. But number 2, he knew who he was. Because he knew whom he believed, he knew who he was. I want you to hear his language. He goes, I know what I was called to. I know what I was appointed to. I know that God handpicked me. I know that I was called and chosen. I want you to hear that word appointed. He said, I was appointed. I started thinking the other day, you know, God's not thinking to himself, man, I don't know how we put Judah in 2020. He was supposed to be in the 1920s. I didn't wire him for 2020. No, wait a minute. The fact that we're having this moment right now, Church Home, the fact that we're on Instagram Live and Church Home app and Facebook and Twitter and Tinder and Hulu and Netflix, Judah, your listing platforms we're not on, true. But the fact of the matter is, you were handpicked for this time. Did you know that? You were handpicked. You were handpicked to be a roommate with that person during this pandemic. You were handpicked to be dad to those kids. You were handpicked to be grandmother to those grandkids. You were handpicked to be the boss of that business that may not be there after this is all said and done. You were handpicked. You were handpicked to be mom and dad, or you were handpicked to be brother and sister. You were handpicked to be the barista. You were handpicked to be that communicator. You were handpicked to be that doctor. You were handpicked to be that policeman. You were handpicked to be that firewoman. You were handpicked for this. You were appointed. This isn't happenstance. This isn't an accident. God gave you those gifts. And I think of Justin, as we're on Instagram Live together. God appointed Justin Bieber for this time, that he would be a disseminator of faith and hope and love to all those who admire him and watch him do what he does. He was appointed for 2020. So let us all not sit around and act shocked that we're alive during these days and these decades and these minutes and these times. I'm here to declare that I was pre-wired before this all started to have the fortitude and the constitution to make it through this season and be somebody who is still full of faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. So I just want to say to people everywhere, you were made for this. You were made for this. This wasn't the doing of God. Free will has free reign to a certain extent on this planet. As a result, it creates problems. It creates diseases and wars and things that are set in motion that God allows because of free will. And as a result, here we are, and it is evil, it is deplorable, it is wicked, and it is not the intent of God that there's a pandemic and a global disease that is taking the lives of precious human beings that are of infinite value before their Creator. But what God always does is he takes what is meant for destruction, and by his own grace and goodness, he works it together for good. And I think back when my dad passed away 11 years ago, nothing about that felt good. Nothing about that felt right. Nothing about that felt fair or just. But over time, boy, the gratitude I have for having a dad, the gratitude I have for the minutes and moments I did have, my whole perspective has changed because of God. God is good, and all that he does is good. I'm coming to a close. My closes lasted as long as my normal closes last. But I want to remind you of Paul's words again. I couldn't be more sure. I mean, is it okay? I don't mean this in a braggadocious way, but I just couldn't be more sure. I couldn't be more sure in the middle of this global quarantine and this pandemic. I couldn't be more sure of God's saving power. I couldn't be more sure of how God satisfies my soul. I couldn't be more sure of the true, lasting, eternal security that God gives me, my wife, my kids, my friends, my family, and the church community I'm a part of. I believe that. I couldn't be more sure. God, we ask right now over this live broadcast that you would encounter, connect, and meet people right now where they are. You know the pain that is outside of our control or even understanding. You know the loss. You know the uncertainty, the mystery.